He planned to marry a senator's daughter while living with me, and I ruined his wedding on live TV. That's how my story begins. My name is Emily Ray, I'm 28, and I work as a nurse in Ohio. For a long time, I believed I had finally met the man I would spend the rest of my life with. His name was Caleb Dwyer. He wasn't just handsome. He had this way of speaking that made you believe every promise he made. Caleb always talked about the future, our future, like it was already written. He said we'd buy a house one day, maybe in the suburbs, raise children together, and grow old side by side. I trusted him completely. When he looked at me and said, "We're going to build something amazing, Emily," I believed him. Every word felt real. He made me feel like I was safe, like I mattered more than anything else. I never thought, not even for a second, that the man who kissed me goodnight would be planning a wedding with another woman at the same time. I didn't see it coming at all. When I think back on the time we spent together, it almost feels like I was living in a carefully painted picture. Everything looked so perfect on the surface. Caleb and I had decided to move in together after a year of dating, and I remember feeling so proud that we were taking that step. It felt like the beginning of something steady, and we found a small apartment with creaky floors and thin walls, but to me it was home. We decorated it with mismatched furniture, laughed about how little we had, and told each other we'd upgrade once we made it. I clung to those moments because they felt like signs of progress, signs of a life that was slowly coming together. At night, after long shifts at the hospital, I would curl up next to him, and he'd talk about what was waiting for us down the road. He'd mention the idea of a house with a backyard, the kind where kids could run barefoot in the summer. He'd say how he wanted to be the kind of father who never missed a game, who taught his son how to throw a ball and his daughter how to ride a bike. He spoke with so much certainty that I never doubted him. I could picture it all because he made it sound so close, like it was just around the corner if we kept pushing forward together. Caleb worked long hours, and he always had explanations for why he wasn't home. He said he was doing extra consulting projects, helping wealthy families manage campaigns, or build strategies for community influence. I didn't know much about that world, but the way he explained it made it sound like hard but respectable work. He often came home exhausted, loosened his tie, and told me he was grinding for our future. He made it clear that the long nights weren't just for him, they were for both of us. That's what I chose to believe. There were moments that made me trust him even more. Every so often, when I was drained from work, he'd surprise me by cooking dinner. It wasn't fancy, sometimes just pasta with too much garlic, but the effort meant everything. He'd set it on the table with a smile and tell me I deserved a break. After we ate, he'd reach across, hold my hand, and talk about how lucky he felt to have me. Those words sank deep because they matched the actions. At least they seemed to. He carried himself with ambition, always talking about goals and opportunities. I admired that drive. I thought it was what separated him from men who didn't plan ahead. When he said he wanted stability, I believed him because he backed it up with late nights, with ideas about saving money, with dreams we painted together. Looking back, the illusion was complete because he gave me enough pieces to believe it was true. The dinners, the talks about kids, the stories about work, they all tied together to form this picture of a man building a life with. I never once thought he was spinning a web. I never considered that behind every detail he shared, there was another life being prepared, one I had no place in. It didn't happen all at once. At first, the changes in Caleb were so small I almost ignored them. He started coming home later than usual, saying his projects were picking up, that his clients needed more of his time. Sometimes he'd tell me he had to travel out of town for a day or two. He always had an explanation ready, and because I trusted him, I didn't push too hard. Still, something about the way he said it made me uneasy, like there was more behind the words than he wanted me to know. Then the little signs began to show. One night when I was doing laundry, I emptied his pockets and found a receipt from an expensive steakhouse across town. He told me earlier he had been stuck in the office ordering takeout, so seeing that paper with a bill for 2 meals stung. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said it was a work dinner, that these things happened all the time when networked. He brushed it off so easily, and I told myself not to overthink. Not long after, he came home with a silk tie I didn't recognize. I knew I hadn't bought it, and Caleb wasn't the type to shop for himself. I asked where it came from, and he said a client had gifted it as thanks for his help. He spoke so smoothly, looking me in the eye as if daring me to doubt him. A knot formed in my stomach, but I swallowed my questions and forced a smile. It didn't stop there. Caleb suddenly developed a taste for things far beyond what he used to care about. He wanted tailored suits, fancy cufflinks, even started talking about luxury cars. This wasn't the man I knew, the one who used to laugh at overpriced brands and say he preferred comfort over appearances. When I brought it up, he told me I didn't understand the world he was working in, that appearances mattered if he wanted to rise. "Emily, you worry too much," he said one night. pressing a kiss to my forehead. This is for us. I'm doing all of this, so we'll have the life we've always dreamed about. His words should have soothed me, but instead they left a heavy ache in my chest. Something felt wrong, but I didn't want to admit it to myself. Love has a way of covering up the cracks, of convincing you that doubt is disloyalty. So I silenced the little voice in my head and chose to believe him. I told myself he was tired, overworked, carrying the weight of big responsibilities. I reminded myself of the man who once cooked me dinner and promised me children, and I clung to that image instead of the one unfolding in front of me. I convinced myself to trust him, because the alternative, that he was lying, was too painful to accept. I wanted so badly to believe we were still the same couple who moved into that small apartment with big dreams. So I turned away from the warning signs, even as they grew louder, and let love blind me to the truth that was slowly closing in. It was a regular evening, the kind that should have passed without notice. I was folding laundry, pulling Caleb's shirts from the basket, when I reached into the pocket of one of his jackets. At first, I thought it was just another receipt or maybe a business card, the usual scraps he left behind. But when I unfolded the paper, my hands froze. It wasn't a receipt. It was an invitation. The thick cream-colored card was heavy in my hand, the kind used for formal events. Gold lettering glimmered under the light, and I read the words once, then again, because they didn't make sense the first time. The wedding of Caleb Dwyer and Charlotte Keaton. My eyes traced the names over and over, hoping somehow I had misunderstood. But there it was, printed clearly, impossible to deny. Beneath their names was a date, just 2 months away. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and the room spun around me. Caleb's name next to another woman's. Not just any woman, but the daughter of Senator Harold Keaton, a man whose face was often on the news. I gripped the invitation so tightly it bent at the corners. I wanted it to be a mistake, maybe a mix-up, maybe some other Caleb Dwyer who shared his name. But deep down, I knew better. The realization crashed over me in waves. While he was sharing a home with me, talking about children, promising me a future, he was preparing to stand at an altar with someone else. My stomach turned as I pictured him smiling at this Charlotte, holding her hand the way he held mine, telling her the same sweet words I once thought belonged only to me. Every late night, every business trip, every unexplained detail suddenly came together, and the truth was so sharp it cut through every excuse I had ever believed. I sat there on the floor surrounded by half-folded laundry, staring at that card until my hands shook. Tears blurred the gold letters, but I couldn't let go of it. It was proof that my life, the one I thought I was building with Caleb, was nothing more than a carefully woven lie. The betrayal sank deep. It wasn't just that he was with someone else. It was who she was. A senator's daughter, someone who carried status, power, and influence. I began to understand why he suddenly cared about expensive suits, fancy dinners, and appearances. He wasn't building a future with me. He was preparing himself for her world. My heart ached with the weight of it. Every memory we shared turned sour in my mind. The laughter, the promises, the nights he told me not to worry, they were all part of the mask he wore. I had been living beside a stranger, blind to the truth that was now written in gold ink in my hand. In that moment, everything shattered. The trust, the dreams, the love I thought was real. It all collapsed under the reality that Caleb Dwyer was not mine. He never truly had been. When Caleb came home that night, the invitation was still hidden in the drawer of my bedside table. My hands itched to throw it in his face, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. Still, I couldn't keep quiet for long. After dinner, when he was loosening his tie and settling on the couch, I asked him about the Keaton family. I kept my tone light, almost casual, but my heart was pounding. He barely blinked. Political clients, he said smoothly, as though the answer had been waiting on his tongue. They're powerful people. I've been helping them with strategy, and sometimes they rope me into events. Why? His eyes stayed steady, his voice calm, not a flicker of guilt showing. I pressed a little harder, asking if he was sure that was all. He leaned back, tilted his head, and gave me a look that made me feel small. Emily, you're overthinking again, he said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. You know how complicated politics can be. Invitations get printed, names get attached to projects. You're twisting things into something they're not. His words sliced deeper than if he had yelled. The calmness, the certainty, it made me question myself for a second, even though the card in my drawer proved otherwise. He spoke with such conviction, as though I was the one imagining things. He reminded me of the sacrifices he was making, of how hard he was working, and how much stress came with it. I'm doing this for us, he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Don't let silly doubts ruin what we've built. That moment broke something in me. The way he dismissed my fear, the way he twisted the truth until it sounded like my fault. It was more painful than the lies themselves. I wanted to scream at him, to pull the card from the drawer and shove it under his nose, but I stayed quiet. because I realized if I confronted him directly, he would only deny it again. He would smooth over the cracks with his polished words, and I'd be left questioning my own sanity. So I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I told him I trusted him, that I believed him. His shoulders relaxed, and he kissed my forehead before turning back to his phone. On the outside, it looked like everything was fine, but inside me a storm was building. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while he slept peacefully beside me. My chest burned with betrayal, but beneath the pain, something sharper was taking root. I couldn't unsee that invitation. I couldn't unhear his smooth excuses. He had spun his web so carefully, but he had underestimated. In that silence, I made a choice. If he wanted me to believe nothing was wrong, then that's exactly what I would let him think. I would play along, smile when he spoke of long nights and new suits, and act like the trusting partner he assumed I was. But behind the mask, I would be watching, waiting, preparing. Because while he believed he had fooled me, I was already planning what to do with the truth. The days after that night were some of the hardest I had ever lived through. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work, cooked dinner, laughed at Caleb's stories, and pretended I believed every word. Inside, though, I was carrying a secret he didn't know I held. That invitation card sat hidden like a burning coal, reminding me every day that the man beside me was preparing a wedding with someone else. I cried when he couldn't see me, but after the tears dried, all that was left was a steady fire. I knew I couldn't let him walk away clean. I started small, gathering what I already had. Our lease had both our names on it, so did our internet and electric bills. His handwriting was on sticky notes he left me on the fridge, sweet messages about buying groceries or reminders to pick up milk. I tucked those away. I took quiet pictures of his shoes by the door, his clothes in our closet, the framed photo of us on the shelf. Each piece was a small truth, but together they built a picture that couldn't be denied. At night, while Caleb thought I was reading or working on my laptop, I researched the Keaton family. Senator Harold Keaton was everywhere, on the news, in articles, shaking hands at charity events. His image was polished, always framed around honor, service, and family values. He gave speeches about loyalty, about integrity, about the importance of raising children in strong households. I watched clips of him speaking at rallies, his voice carrying the weight of someone who wanted to be seen as flawless. His daughter Charlotte appeared beside him often, the perfect young woman with a bright smile, admired for her grace and poise. The more I read, the clearer my plan became. Caleb wasn't just marrying for love. He was marrying into power, into a family that would help him climb faster than he ever could on his own. That meant the one thing Senator Keaton cared about more than politics was how the public saw his family. If the truth came out on the day of the wedding, when cameras would be rolling and reporters would be watching, it wouldn't just crush Caleb's dream. It would strike directly at the senator's image, the very thing he guarded most. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I needed to show it. So I kept building my file. Every bill, every photo, every scrap of proof went into a folder that I locked away in a drawer at work so Caleb wouldn't stumble upon. I even copied some things onto a flash drive, just in case. The more I gathered, the stronger I felt. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of hurting him. It was about showing the world who he really was, and making sure he couldn't move on to destroy someone else's life the way he had destroyed mine. Weeks passed, and I kept my mask in place. Caleb thought he was getting away with everything, but he had no idea what was waiting for him. Every smile I gave him, every nod, every I love you was laced with the knowledge that the end was coming. And when it did, it would come in the most public way possible. The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. My hands didn't shake anymore. The tears had dried long ago. I dressed simply, nothing that would draw attention, and slipped the envelope into my bag. Inside it was every piece of proof I had gathered, photos of our apartment, bills with both our names, and the notes Caleb had once written with promises he never meant to keep. I had looked through them so many times that I could recite every detail by heart. Today, they wouldn't just be my private truth. Today, everyone would see them. The church was grand, decorated with white roses and soft lights that glowed against stained glass windows. People were already filling the pews when I walked in, blending quietly into the back row. No one noticed me. Their eyes were on the splendor, on the guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses, on the cameras set up at angles to capture every moment for the evening broadcast. The weight of the Keaton name was everywhere, in the way people spoke in hushed tones, in the way reporters carefully adjusted their microphones. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a stage. I sat with my bag clutched tight against me, heart pounding but steady. Every minute felt longer than the last. The music began, and the bridal party entered. Then Charlotte appeared in a gown so bright it seemed to glow, her father proudly escorting her down the aisle. She looked radiant, hopeful, like a woman stepping into the life she thought she deserved. My chest tightened at the sight of her. She didn't know what kind of man she was about to marry. Caleb stood waiting at the altar, polished in a black suit, his smile wide and confident. I studied his face, searching for any sign of guilt, but all I saw was ambition. He looked like a man who thought he had won, who believed the world was falling neatly into place for him. For a brief second, I almost pitied him. But then I remembered the nights I cried alone while he told lies to my face. The pity disappeared, replaced by a cold determination. The ceremony moved forward. Words of devotion were spoken, prayers recited, and cameras zoomed in to catch every detail. My fingers brushed the edge of the envelope inside my bag, waiting. I knew my moment was coming, the line I had played in my head 100 times. Finally, the priest's voice rang through the hall. If anyone has any reason these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The room fell silent. All eyes were on the couple, smiles frozen, breaths held. And then I stood. My knees felt heavy, but my back was straight, and my voice, though trembling inside, came out steady. I have a reason, I said, my words echoing across the church. Heads turned sharply, whispers rippling through the pews. Cameras swung toward me, catching every movement. I took a deep breath, the envelope firm in my hand. The moment I had been waiting for was finally here. All eyes followed me as I stepped out from the back row. My footsteps echoed on the polished floor, slow and steady, though inside my chest my heart was pounding so hard I thought the whole room could hear it. The cameras shifted toward me, lenses zooming in to catch the unexpected interruption. People whispered, some craned their necks, others looked annoyed at the disruption. But I didn't stop. I walked down the aisle, the envelope clutched tight in my hands, until I stood only a few feet away from Caleb and Charlotte. Charlotte's smile faltered as she saw me. Caleb's face went pale, then flushed with panic. He stepped forward slightly, his hand lifting as if to block me, but it was too late. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first piece of proof, a photograph of our apartment, his shoes by the door, his coat draped over the chair, and me smiling beside him. I held it up for everyone to see. A collective gasp rippled through the room. This man, I said, my voice carrying through the church, has been living with me while planning this wedding. I laid the photo on the altar, then pulled out a stack of bills with both our names printed clearly across the top. Here are our utility bills, our lease, the proof of a life he promised me while standing here today pretending to be someone else. Reporters leaned forward, their cameras catching every detail. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, her bouquet trembling in her hand. Senator Keaton's face turned a furious shade of red, his jaw locked tight as he glared at Caleb. I wasn't finished. From the envelope, I drew out a folded note, one of many Caleb had written to me. In his handwriting, it read about how he planned to make connections through Charlotte's family, and how much easier life would be once he had married into power. My voice shook only slightly as I read the words aloud, the sound echoing through the silent hall. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, shouts, chairs scraping as people turned to each other in disbelief. Charlotte dropped her bouquet, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at Caleb like she didn't recognize him. The senator muttered something sharp under his breath before rising from his seat, his fists clenched at his sides. Caleb lunged toward me, his voice desperate. Emily, stop this. You don't understand. He reached for the papers, but I held them close. His polished calm was gone now, replaced by raw fear. He begged, his voice cracking, but I didn't waver. I looked straight into his eyes, steady and unflinching. You planned a life with me while marrying her, I said clearly, each word cutting through the noise. Now everyone knows who you really are. For a long moment, the room was chaos. Charlotte sobbing, the senator shouting, guests buzzing in shock, reporters recording every second. And Caleb stood there, exposed, stripped of every lie he had built. His future collapsed around him, and I was the one who had pulled the thread. The church erupted into chaos the moment I finished speaking. Guests rose from their seats, voices overlapping in shock and anger. Charlotte stood frozen for only a second before she tore the veil from her head and dropped it onto the floor. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at Caleb one last time, then turned and walked quickly down the aisle. The senator followed her, his expression dark, his hand gripping her arm as though to shield her from more humiliation. Their exit left a silence heavier than any words. Caleb tried to reach for me again, but others stepped in. Two men from the Keaton side grabbed his arms and pulled him back, their disgust clear. He struggled at first, but the fight drained from him when he saw the cameras still pointed in his direction. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something hollow. I stood there watching him being dragged away, his polished image shattered in front of everyone who once admired him. The ceremony was officially over. Guests whispered as they hurried out, some avoiding my gaze, others giving me nods that carried something close to respect. The reporters, though, stayed rooted in place. Their microphones and cameras captured every angle, and I knew even then that this moment wouldn't stay within these walls. It would be replayed, analyzed, and spread until Caleb's name was tied to betrayal forever. Later that evening, when I finally turned on the television in my quiet apartment, I saw exactly that. Footage of me standing in the church, holding up bills and photographs, filled the screen. Headlines called Caleb a fraud, a liar who had lived a double life. Clips of Senator Keaton storming out played beside shaky shots of Charlotte crying, her gown trailing behind her as she left the church. Caleb's reputation was in pieces before the night was over. I sat on my couch and let the sound wash over me. Part of me was numb, part of me was aching, but beneath it all was a steady calm. I knew I had lost the man I once thought I loved, but I also knew I had taken away his chance to hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. He wanted to rise by using lies, and now those same lies had buried him. I didn't feel joy, not exactly. Heartbreak doesn't disappear just because justice is served. But I felt something close to relief. For weeks I had carried the weight of his betrayal alone, hiding behind a mask. Now the truth was out, and it was no longer mine to hold. Caleb's future was gone, his ambitions ruined, and I had been the one to end it. I sat back, wiped my eyes, and whispered to myself that it was over. For the first time in a long while, I believed it. The weeks that followed felt heavy. I carried myself through work and daily routines, but when I came home, the silence pressed down on me. The apartment that once felt full of laughter and plans now felt like an empty shell. His shoes were gone, his clothes no longer in the closet, but his presence lingered in small ways I couldn't ignore. At night, I cried until my chest ached, not for the man he really was, but for the love I believed I had. I mourned the future I thought was mine, the family we talked about, the security I once felt beside him. It was grief, plain and simple, and it took its time passing through. But as the days turned into weeks, something else began to take root. I noticed that every time I remembered the wedding, I didn't just feel sorrow. I also felt strength. I had faced him in front of everyone, spoken the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I hadn't let him walk away with his lies wrapped neatly around him. I had chosen myself, even when it broke my heart to do it. That thought slowly became my anchor. Friends reached out, some in disbelief, some in admiration. They told me I was brave, that most people would have stayed silent out of fear or shame. I didn't always believe them, but deep down, I knew I had done what I needed to do. Not just for Charlotte, not just to protect the Keaton family's image, but for me. If I had stayed silent, I would have carried that weight forever, always wondering if I had let him win. Instead, I stood tall and made sure he could never erase what he had done. Time softened the sharp edges of my pain. The tears still came, but less often. I started to see myself not as the woman who was fooled, but as the woman who refused to be broken by it. That shift didn't happen overnight, but little by little, I began to believe it. I thought back to that first night when I found the invitation, when my world shattered in a single moment. I remembered how small and powerless I felt then. Standing in that church, envelope in hand, I had reclaimed the power he tried to take from me. And even though it left scars, it also left me with proof that I was stronger than I ever thought. In the end, I came to accept both sides of the story, the heartbreak and the justice. It hurt deeply to lose the man I thought I loved, but it healed me to know I didn't let him continue his lie. He planned to marry a senator's daughter while living with me, but I took my heartbreak and turned it into his downfall. And I would do it again.